Eddie was always boasting and telling the other engines how to behave. One day, he was showing off to Max. "You watch me this afternoon as I rush through with the express," he said. "That will be a splendid sight for you when you're shunting trucks." And before he puffed away, Eddie continued, "Don't play around with the trucks, Max. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it." Max ignored Eddie. It was fun playing with the trucks. He came up quietly behind them and gave them a push. Then he stopped suddenly, and the silly trucks bumped into each other. "Oh!" they cried. "Whatever is happening?" Max played until there were no more trucks to move. Then he stopped to rest. Suddenly, Max heard a whistle. It was Eddie, and he was very cross. Instead of pulling nice shiny coaches, he was pulling lots of dirty coal trucks. "A goods train," he grumbled. "The shame of it!" Eddie went slowly past, with the trucks clattering behind him. Max laughed and went to find more trucks. But soon there was trouble. A porter came and spoke to Max's driver. "Eddie can't get up the hill," he said. "Will you take Max to push him, please?" Max found Eddie halfway up the hill. His driver was very cross with him. "You are not trying," he shouted at Eddie. "I can't do it," replied Eddie. "The silly coal trucks are holding me back." Max came up behind Eddie's brake van, ready to push. "You'll be no use at all," huffed Eddie. "You wait and see," replied Max. The guard blew his whistle, and Eddie tried to pull forward as Max pushed him as hard as he could. "I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it," puffed Eddie. "I will do it, I will do it, I will do it," puffed Max. Max pushed and puffed with all his strength, and before long, Eddie was at the top of the hill. "I've done it," he said proudly, forgetting all about Max pushing behind. And Eddie ran on to the next station without stopping to say thank you. But the L-Street controller didn't forget to thank Max. The next day, he was given a beautiful coat of purple paint with pink stripes. Eddie hadn't learned his lesson. He still boasted and told the other engines how to behave. Now it was Sid's turn. "Sid whistles too much," said Eddie. "Respectable engines don't whistle loudly at stations. It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it." Poor Sid felt sad. "Never mind," whispered Jake. "I like your whistling." The next morning, as Eddie left the shed, he called to Sid. "Goodbye, Sid. Be sure and remember what I said about whistling." Later that day, Sid took a slow train to Max's station. "Hello, Sid," said Max. "I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday." "Thank you, Max," smiled Sid. "Shoo! Can you hear something?" Max listened. Far away, but getting louder and louder, was the sound of an engine's whistle. "It sounds like Eddie," said Max, "but Eddie never whistles like that." But it was Eddie. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous speed. Eddie's whistle valve wouldn't close, and he was whistling fit to burst. He screamed through the station and disappeared. "Well," said Max, looking at Sid. "It isn't wrong, but we just don't do it," chuckled Sid, and Max laughed. Meanwhile, Eddie screeched along the line. People came out of their houses, fire engines set off to find the fire, and old ladies dropped their parcels in shock. The noise was awful. Porters and passengers held their ears. The L-Street controller held his ears, too. "Take him away," he bellowed. "And stop that noise." Still whistling, Eddie puffed sadly away. He whistled as he crossed the points. He whistled in the siding. Eddie was still whistling as the last passenger left the station. Then two fitters climbed up and knocked Eddie's whistle valve into place. And at last there was silence. Eddie slunk into the shed. He was very glad it was empty. He didn't want anyone to make fun of him. Later that evening, the other engines came back. "It isn't wrong," murmured Max, "but we just don't do it." And all the engines laughed, apart from Eddie. From then on, Eddie was a much quieter, humbler engine. Well, for a few days, anyway.